Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Planning Advisory Committee for the Town of Quispamsis for Tuesday, March 8th. Item 2, approval of agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved,
Brenda?
Mark.
Mark, seconder, Brenda?
Seconded.
Can we all vote for the approval of the agenda, please? Motion carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 3. Is there any disclosures of any interest? None being, we'll move on to item 4. Approval of previous minutes. Can I have a motion to approve previous minutes, please? Brent?
So moved.
Can I have a seconder on that? Brenda?
So moved.
Okay. Can we have a vote on the approval of the minutes, please? Motion carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 5. Business arising from previous minutes. Can I have a motion to receive and file, please? Brenda?
So moved.
Have a seconder on that?
Second.
Kendall, thank you. Can we have a vote on the business arising from previous minutes in the motion? Motion carried unanimously. We'll move on to item 6, unfinished business. None being, we'll move on to new business, item 7A. Could the applicant please come up to the podium, and we'll get Jennifer to introduce that item. It's an application requesting a location variance for a detached garage on the waterfront property of 5 Gilbert Lane. Jennifer, can you introduce that topic, please?
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. We are looking for approval for a detached garage in front of the front line of the main dwelling. On the lot, it's proposed to be an 87 square meter garage. This development is occurring on the waterfront property. However, it is further away from it's further than 30 meters away from the water, so there is no requirement for environment to weigh in. However, the lot was just had the main dwelling unit built the last year or so, and there was an environmental review done at that time. Staff have no concerns with this, and no concerns were received from the public. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jennifer. Could the applicant please state their name for the record?
Kevin Richardson.
Kevin, you would have received the same package we did in the mail.
Yes.
Is there anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to members of PAC or members of the public asking you questions?
I don't believe so. Everything seems straightforward.
Okay, thank you. Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Brenda?
Just a quick question. I started drive down there and I said, nah, I don't want to go down there. So I'm assuming there's a house on that lot. I understand why you want to build in front of it for a new garage.
Yeah.
But I think we have to make sure too, as we do if you have a low house, that we're not, you can't come back to this town and say, yeah, my garage flooded. So I think we have to have that whole harmless agreement in place also.
Oh, absolutely not. And I did the same thing for the house too.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Any further questions from PAC to the applicant? Is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? None being, Would a member of PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions? Mr. Preston?
I'll make the motion, the Planning Advisory Committee approve a variance to section 2501A1 to allow the development of a detached garage within the front yard of the main building on the property of 5 Gilbert Lane, PID 303-41135, subject to the following terms and conditions. 1, exterior finish of the garage is to be a cladding recognized by the National Building Code of Canada, current adopted edition. 2, the detached garage is not to be used for business purposes, self-storage rental, for the keeping of livestock, or as a dwelling. 3, a building permit is to be issued prior to construction. 4, a hold harmless agreement is to be entered into with the town of Quispamsis.
Thank you, Brent. Can I have a seconder on that motion, please? Kendall?
I'll second it. Thanks.
Is there any debate on the motion? None being, can we please vote on the motion, please? That motion's carried unanimously by a vote of 5-0. With that, congratulations, and please work with the town to get all necessary paperwork signed off, and you'll have a letter in the mail in 5 to 7 business days.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oops, wrong one, hang on here. Jeez. Okay. We'll move on to item 7B. The request PAC for a home occupation, a limousine service located at 15 Khaki Court, PID 303-43636. Could the applicant please come up to the podium? And we'll get Jennifer. Can you introduce that item, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be honored to. 15 Khaki Court, home occupation. As you stated, it's a limousine service. This is found in a rural zone. It's a new subdivision development. The home is actually under construction, I believe, as we speak. So the applicant, I don't believe, is residing there as of yet. Let's see. It's a basement office that he's proposing with storage in the garage of the vehicle. The office will consume 6% of the overall floor area of the home. The applicant holds a Class 2 driver's license and $2 million in liability. The liability also covers paying passengers. There are no concerns received from the public, and staff have no concerns with this application. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jennifer. Could you please state your name for the record, please?
Yes, Derek.
Derek, you were to receive the same package we did in the mail. Is there anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to questions from PAC or members of the public?
No, none whatsoever.
All right, thank you. Does any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? None being, is there anyone online or in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? Is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? None being, would a member of PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions, please? Kendall.
I'll put a motion forward. I recommend the Planning Advisory Committee grant approval for a home occupation limousine service at 15 Khaki Court, PID 30343636, subject to the following conditions. Number 1,
It shall be secondary to the main residential use of the dwelling. Number 2, not more than one person is engaged therein in addition to any permanent resident of the dwelling unit in which it's located. Number 3, it is confined to the dwelling unit and no part of it is located in an accessory building or structure. Number 4, the floor area of the dwelling unit, which is devoted to it, does not exceed the lesser of 25% of the floor area of the dwelling unit. Number 5, no change except for a sign pursuant to the town's sign bylaw is made in the outside appearance of the building, which would indicate that a home occupation is being conducted therein unless approved by the building inspector through the process of a building permit. Number 6, no goods or services other than those directly pertaining to the home occupation are supplied or sold therein or therefrom. Number 7, no more than 2 commercial vehicles used in connection therewith, or not more than 2 vehicles of any kind bearing a sign in connection therewith is parked on the lot. Number 8, there is to be no parking on the street or within town property. And number 9, the PAC approval to operate the business is non-transferable. The approval is solely for the benefit of the property owner named herein. In the event the business is discontinued or the lands are transferred, the said approval shall terminate.
Thank you, Kendall. Can I have a seconder on that? Brent?
And Mark here.
Oh, Mark? Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Is there any debate on that motion? None being, can we have a vote, please? Dwight, you gotta,
Just through you, Mr. Chair, just further to the recommendations, one item that wasn't noted there, and I'm just wondering if it would be considered, would be just confirmation in terms of a taxi cab license. I know it's not a taxi cab, but just to ensure that that's been cleared off in terms of through the police. Just to confirm that if that's necessary, and if it's necessary, then that would be taken as well.
okay, we'll add that, okay, thank you.
It's not issued by the town, it's through the regional police.
Okay, thank you. Is that okay? Yep.
Sorry, can I? It's just, I know it's not in our taxi cab bylaw where it covers limousine service, but we're transporting passengers just to ensure that that is compliant. So you're basically going to the regional police and saying, here's what I'm proposing to do. It's been approved, hopefully, by the Planning Advisory Committee, and just making sure that if there's a license required, that you would to obtain that license.
From what I understand, no bylaw for it, so therefore there wouldn't be, for limousine service, there's no bylaw. There's a taxi bylaw.
Right,
But
so,
not-
but just so.
So we're just clearing it with KV, I believe, Regional Police Department?
That's correct.
Very good.
Thanks, Dwight. With that, that motion is carried unanimously. And so in 5 to 7 business days, you're gonna have a letter in the mail. And please make sure all necessary paperwork and what Dwight just talked about is followed up with. And
Okay.
best of luck.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Have a good evening.
You too. Okay, we're gonna go on to item 7C, Gold Rush Drive Extension. 613086 NB Limited requesting approval for tentative subdivision for Gold Rush Drive Extension. Could the applicant please come up to the podium? In the meantime, Dwight, do you want to introduce that topic? If you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's an application, subdivision application for the extension of Gold Rush Drive that will see the creation of 10 residential lots. This is an application and a subdivision plan that's been before PAC on a couple of other occasions. PAC did recommend approval, and subsequent to that approval was given to the tentative plan. For all intent and purposes, the plan is pretty much the same as what was previously submitted to PAC. In accordance with the Community Planning Act, because there's a public street being created and land for public purposes, as well as there's a couple of lot width variances that are required. And they're proposing a reduction in the street right-of-way width. So PAC will have to provide recommendations in terms of supporting the actual extension of the street, the lot width variances, and what's being proposed for land for public purposes. There's, in terms of the overall layout, the street length will see the cul-de-sac extend to 223 meters from the point of intersection with Yukon Drive. Subdivision bylaw requires that once you go over 183 meters, PAC can grant a variance up to 225, provided there is a connection, either an alternate to a street connection, some sort of access. In this particular case, we're challenged by the fact that we have a significant wetland area. And as you see on the plan, there was originally proposed to be a future street. However, if we look at making that street connection, there would actually be significant impacts on the wetland area, and it would also trigger other approvals from the province. And in the best interest of the development and in sort of the best interest of protecting the wetland and the overall benefit that we would get, there would be no street connection. There is a trail already that runs adjacent to this particular area. So that was something that we looked at in the previous reviews of this, and at this time there's been sort of nothing that would change the previous approvals and variances that were granted for that. In terms of the land for public purposes, there's already again a trail that's constructed through there. It's been there for some time. There's also a sewer easement that runs across there in terms of the sewer main. This LPP is significant and aids in both stormwater attenuation and just overall protection of the area. And it also aids in actually recharging of the aquifers. So by maintaining the significant wetland area that's there, it would sort of aid in a number of factors. In terms of water studies, because the development is less than it's only 10 lots, then and a full sort of a full comprehensive water study is not required. So other than that, would be just looking at sort of the variances, the lot width variances. The lot width variances is because the lots are narrow in terms of where they front the streets, but the overall lot depths will exceed the minimum lot areas of 1,140 square meters. So that's the lot area that would compensate for that narrowing of the lot width. So there isn't really any concerns with the actual development or any challenges that would present. Other than that, I think that's sort of an overview, and I'm open to any questions from PAC and the applicant. I may have more to add.
Thanks, Dwight. Please state your name for the record, please.
Yes, Rick Turner on behalf of the property owners.
Mr. Turner, you would have received the same package we didn't mail. Is there anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to members of the PAC or public asking you questions?
Well, I think it's certainly worth reiterating some of Dwight's comments with regard to the large area of land for public purposes that's being dedicated. This property is under an environmental impact assessment through the province, so it's under more scrutiny than most developments. There's a number of variances that were requested here, and those variances would respond primarily to Department of Environment conditions that they placed on the property. And we're certainly in agreement with them. The vesting of the land for public purposes certainly works well in keeping with the town's principles and objectives for sustainable development. The area vested is 38% of the total land being subdivided where the bylaws call for 10%, so we have no problem with that. And the Saunders Brook Trail, I mean, we look at it that we're making a major contribution towards the Saunders Brook Trail because presently it's built on private property, but this will actually put it on land for public purposes, and at least then there's no potential issue going forward in the future. I think, and we're in agreement with the conditions set out, so I think I'll leave it at that, see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Members of PAC, is there any questions for the applicant? Brent?
Mr. Turner, in the staff recommendation, or the staff report, says the applicant is indicating that since there's an access to the LPP and existing trail system adjacent to lot 73, this is significant as a secondary access. There is no secondary access there. I guess, or can you define what you feel is this as an access?
It would be difficult to put it in as a formal access, and the reason I say that is because of some of the things that have been pointed out. That area is environmentally sensitive, so it certainly is something that makes it difficult to do anything further there. And that's why we're vesting substantial land towards the environmental interest of the community.
So basically you're saying the playground is your access?
It's an area where there could be an access. It would be difficult to go through, and that's something that we'll certainly be dealing with through the developer's agreement process.
Yes, but you're saying, it's, as of today, you're saying it is sufficient as a secondary access. And when I'm reading the staff report,
Yes.
which I understand would have come from discussions with you, is that as the developer's representative, you're saying that is the playground is a significant access point.
That would be where you would have to create an access point, yes.
Okay, you're not answering the question, but we'll move on.
Dwight, you want to chime in there? Dwight?
An alternate access into that area is going to be difficult just because of the environmental constraints that's on there in the wetland. So you have to balance the overall, I guess, development and access points in through there. We're looking at additional 10 lots, and I know in the staff report it does recommend, providing access from the playground back to the trail, but when we look at a little closer, that's a significant brook through there, which would actually entail, additional conditions from the environment. So that's something that we'd have to look at further as part of this process and prior to approvals and development agreements. So the connection, the future access connection into Alderbrook or in that particular area is just, it is a wet area, and I think the less you disturb it, the trade-off is flood mitigation and those types of things. So once you start getting in there and start altering the wetland to the point where you'd have to put an access in, I think it's creating additional challenges.
Apologize there. My apologies to Mr. Preston. I didn't quite catch the gist of your question there, sorry.
You want any clarification?
No, Dwight.
You're good?
Dwight has clarified.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Kendall, you have any?
My question is in regards to the wetland and lots 1 and 2, and it looks like the developer's gonna construct a berm. Does that mean that in a stormwater event, lots 1 and 2, would it experience flooding in the backyard?
No, one of the conditions set out in the environmental approval, we actually did a study of the area there that potentially can have flooding. And there's a place where there's culverts on Yukon Drive downstream. We actually got elevations of the roadway at Yukon Drive so that if there was ever any flooding and those culverts blocked and it overtopped the road, then the water would back up towards this property. There's a condition where the houses on lots, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are to be built to an elevation which is higher than the Yukon Drive street, so that takes away any possibility of flooding.
Okay, so the finished floor is of an elevation that it wouldn't flood in,
Yes.
and then the berm is kind of like an additional support, or?
The berm is for stormwater attenuation.
All right,
We've got some runoff that will be increasing the runoff where the street is, but that will bring it to the neutral point where it's pre and post flows are at least
all right, okay.
accounted for. And I think it's worth mentioning too, and it's in the report. The same company that has this property is the one that built the major stormwater attenuation pond on Vincent Road. And I'm confident that that major piece of infrastructure is certainly helping the situation.
All right, thanks.
Any further questions for the applicant from members of PAC? None being, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Could you please come up and state your name for the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the PAC. My name is Brent Moore. My wife, Stephanie Cullen, and I reside at 47 Gold Rush Drive. I'd like if the PAC member, I think Mr. Colburn, could bring up slide 3 where it showed the water when he was introducing this item. Thank you. In the wetlands. If you will notice in 47 Gold Rush Drive, as it is mapped, indicated on this map, we get significant water flow, storm water. My wife has had to spend thousands of dollars of our own funds mitigating water damage. And as development has occurred in the surrounding area, the volume of water in the back of our property will rise on average 2 to 3 feet during a storm surge. And the culvert system that crosses Yukon can often not accommodate that water. And so, we've had backup through our, as I said, through our backup valve, and it has caused damage to the house. And again, we've taken factors to mitigate it. Obviously, with the construction of a new subdivision, it would affect the overall water table, I believe. And I'm wondering if that could be factored into this decision. I have spoken with Mr. Turner previous. I saw him doing a walk through the lot and spoke to him of these concerns about the increase in the water table. Because, as I said, the water issue that comes through that wetland area next to the trail is an extreme concern because, as I said, I'm afraid of compound damage. And I'll take any questions from the committee or Mr. Turner on that.
So 47, I'm just trying to picture that.
That is the corner lot
Oh,
between
37 or 47?
47.
Okay, up
So
the
we
corner.
sit on the
Yeah.
we sit on the junction of where Yukon meets Gold Rush.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Our property elevation is below Yukon physically. So when water comes to behind our property, you can see the tree line as indicated. Water will come up to the edge of that grass. And it said if you went out there and did a study, that would be a total height of about 3 feet. So in a storm, and that's, a typical storm event.
Okay.
The culverts have a very hard time keeping up with the flow. And even since, the Vincent Road subdivision that did put in the water berm, it didn't have a overall negative impact, but the issue of not being able to sufficiently get flow out of that ditch area behind us, that wetland area behind our home, is a significant concern.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other anyone online or in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone else online or in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? None being, Mr. Turner, would you like to come back up to the podium, please? And
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in our world of wearing masks, the gentleman that was just up, Mr. Moore, he had actually run into Ken Prosser on the site. Ken has been doing our civil work in the subdivision up where the big attenuation pond is. So I don't disagree with the comments made. I looked at, when we were going through the EIA process, I looked at Yukon Drive as a choke point on that system. That's why we put in the conditions to build up above an elevation so that it wouldn't cause the problem that these people are speaking of. We are doing the stormwater management pond, which is the berm that Mr. Mason had pointed out. The Vincent Road Pond is a major piece there. I personally think that the town has got to look at that Yukon Drive area and the culverts that are there, and something more to allow that flow would be very appropriate. I don't know if that's something that you can note for capital budget purposes or what.
yeah, that's not for this meeting, but Rick, Mr. Turner, so for this project, you're not introducing any more water on 47, or?
No, we will be controlling the flows, so pre and post flows are accommodated.
And that's part of that study that'll confirm that there's no additional water will back up to other properties? You're gonna, is that part of that whole study?
That would be correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not gonna solve the problem. It will not exasperate it.
It's not gonna increase it's not gonna
solve it.
increase any additional water flows on the existing residents that live there today.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turner. That being said, any members of PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions? Any members of PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions, please? Kendall?
Sorry, I was having technical difficulties here. Recommend that PAC grant approval to the Gold Rush Drive extension, tentative subdivision plan for the subdividing and development of PID 248716, the creation of 10 single-family dwelling unit building lots, the extension of Gold Rush Drive, an existing public street, the creation of a local government service easement, and the creation of 11,800 square meters of land for public purposes, subject to the following conditions. Number one, a lot width variance of 4 meters for lots 5, 6, and 7. Number two, PAC support the reduction in the street right-of-way to 18 meters and asphalt driving surface width of 6 meters and a widened shoulder as per the proposed street cross-section shown on the plan. Number three, approval of cul-de-sac length of 223 meters. Number four, construction or contribution to the construction of the trail connection to the Saunders Brook Trail. Number 5, compliance with conditions of the Technical Review Committee of the Department of Environment correspondence dated July 25th, 2016. Confirmation of the water course alteration permit required for Saunders Brook. Number 7, amendment to the Timberley Estate Phase 3 subdivision plan to designate the future street to LPP. Number 8, submission of the street centerline profile to determine if the street grade variances are required. Number 9, submission of a comprehensive stormwater management plan demonstrating pre and post development balance flows with no negative downstream impacts. Number 10, submission of an engineered design sanitary sewage system. Number 11, acceptance of the proposed LPP with a credit established for the developer for any future subdivisions with the existing municipal services easement to be designated as LPP. Number 12, no further subdividing of lots 6, 7, and 8 with a note to be added to the plan. Number 13, the developers to enter into a subdivision development agreement with the town. Number 14, payment of filing fees in the amount of $300. And number 15, final plan signed by property owners.
Thank you, Kendall. Can I have a seconder on that?
I'll second that.
Was that Mark?
Mark.
Mark Guest? Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Is there any debate on that motion? Brent?
A couple items. So my question is with regards to the comprehensive stormwater management plan, can we make an amendment to that to address the concerns of the residents at Lot 47 Yukon, if possible, to actually improve the balance flows so they're not getting flooded out the way it is now? Is that doable, Dwight?
So our current specs and our policies with respect to stormwater management is the developer is required to provide a stormwater management plan that demonstrates net zero, which basically means pre and post are balanced. There's no obligation to upgrade or improve downstream unless your stormwater management system demonstrates that you cannot control the amount of water that's coming off your lot within your development. So if your capacity is exceeded and then it's going to have a negative impact downstream, then you have to look at upgrading infrastructure downstream as it relates to your subdivision.
Addressed then once you see the report. Okay.
It's making sure that there's no increase in flows and that the infrastructure downstream can accommodate it. However, with that being said, it's duly noted that there is a concern and that can be relayed to engineering to work with the developer to see if there's something can be done at the time of construction. The development's ongoing to address it, so it's noted and that will be passed on to engineering through this process.
Another question, Mr. Chairman, is regards to the lots on the south side of the property being developed along the LPP. I'm assuming any environmental concerns are going to be addressed from the report of 2016, is that correct? I guess I thought,
Hang on. Go ahead, Brent. Hang on.
my question is with regards to the properties or the lots being developed on the south side of the property adjacent to the LPP. I know it says in the recommendation compliance with conditions of the Technical Review Committee of the Department of Environment from 2016. I'm assuming that's going to address all the concerns about sediment and all that, or is that a separate issue with that, or is that addressed in that report?
In terms of the sediment?
I can't put both on.
Yeah, so covered in terms of the conditions of approval, so you can't just let sediment come off and go into the wetland, so, and those are conditions of any development within, in adjacent to a wetland. Those are standard conditions, so that would be covered. My add-on through you, Mr. Chairman, to that recommendation would be, we note the date of July 25th, 2016. I would further add that if there's any additional or newer correspondence, then we would follow those most latest recommendations from the technical committee. I believe it's been reviewed since 2016.
And my other question, Mr. Chairman, was the concern in the report about the piece of property adjacent to Alderbrook that you want to do a land swap. Mr. Dwight, does that need to be in the motion, or is that outside the motion? Okay.
With that, we have our seconder for that? Had that seconder, correct, Violet?
Yes, sorry.
All right.
Notes here.
No, we're on debate, Is there any further debate?
Mr. Chairman, Mark here.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
On condition number four, construction or contribution to the construction of the trail connection to the Saunders Brook Trail. That's a pretty broad statement. What is the developer committing himself here? He could give us $100 and that's his contribution, or he could give us $50,000 towards a contribution. So I find this conditions pretty broad. I'm trying to understand what it means exactly.
Dwight?
The intent of that statement was to look at providing a connection from the existing LPP where the playground is to simply provide an access from the trail to the playground area. So the intent was basically if somebody's utilizing the trail and they wanted to get quick access to the playground rather than having to go down and up Yukon to simply go in. However, like I said earlier, that condition actually needs further investigation because of the brook and the amount in terms of how do you access it? So is it simply a bridge across there, or is it a culvert that you're actually putting a pathway across? So there's a further investigation that's required. So in terms of that condition, it probably should be amended to say that it requires further review with the engineering and planning department, and is something that would be finalized prior to the development agreement.
Does that satisfy your needs there, Mark, to adjust that to say needs to be further discussed prior to the developmental agreement being signed?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kendall?
Just where I had one more question in regards to stormwater. Did you guys perform a stormwater analysis downstream looking at the culverts? Is that what you told me earlier? Sorry, I wasn't sure.
We didn't check the flows through those culverts. I just looked at it and it's an obvious choke point. And what I was gonna do is try to get a comment in that it's something that I think the engineering department should have a look at. Actually, Mr. Colburn beat me to that, but no, it's definitely something that should be looked at. Our analysis was to keep the pre and post. Yeah.
Any further questions from members of PAC on the debate? So we made, before we take the vote, I believe the adjustment was made on item 4 to have a review of the construction of the trail system to come up with an agreement prior to the subdivision agreement being signed. And I think that was the only one that really changed.
The 2006 report.
Oh yeah, look at the 2006 report. Is anything new out of that? Anything new that was added to look at that? I think you agreed to that, Mr. Turner?
Yes.
So that was only the other adjustments to the motion. So if we're all okay with that, we'll take a vote, please. That motion was carried unanimously in 5 to 7 business days, Mr. Turner. You have your letter in the mail. Please work with the town to have all necessary paperwork, work with the neighbors to ensure there's no extra, and the town will too, make sure there's no extra buildup on the properties.
Could appoint to speak with the property owner that spoke there, and any support we can give
Yeah.
them in that, we certainly will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore, I just wanna maybe, just throw out a suggestion there, maybe it's worthwhile to write a letter to the town and addressing your concerns. I think that would be an important thing to do, and hopefully that can get addressed and maybe help alleviate while this is going on. Maybe there's something that can be done accordingly at the same time or similar times to help alleviate the issue that you guys are concerned with. So thanks for bringing that up to the attention. You're welcome. We're gonna move on to item 7D. Applicant is seeking approval to permit a residential use in lower level of a two Clairwood Drive, PID 0005-4205. Could the applicant please come up to the microphone? Jennifer, can you introduce that topic, please?
I certainly can, Mr. Chair. Thank you. The applicant is requesting a residential use to be permitted in the lower level of 2 Clairwood. The municipal plan, section 4.13.3, allows for neighborhood commercial uses in all areas designated as commercial on the future land use map. And 2 Clairwood is identified on the future land use map as a commercial property. We're also seeking relaxation to section 15A1A, which requires the residential component to be in the upper level and the commercial component to be in the lower level. We're actually looking for that. Commercial will be in the top level.
Jennifer, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Mr.
Yep.
Chair?
Yep.
Okay. How much did you miss?
When you talked about the residential was being the
Okay.
normal at bottom and the commercial, or the commercial at bottom, residential at top. And this is opposite, I guess?
Okay, that's right. So she is seeking a relaxation on that, where the bylaw requires that the commercial component be in the lower, and the residential in the upper. So we're looking at a reversal of that. The lot is currently zoned central commercial, and it is 1,624 square meters. The upper level is currently used as a podiatry clinic, and the bottom level is vacant. The podiatry clinic was approved by PAC in September of 2019 as a similar use to that of an office. The applicant wishes to remodel the lower level with an Airbnb with short-term rentals, and also for her parents' use during certain times of the year. Historically, the subject lot was developed as a single-family dwelling prior to the implementation of a zoning bylaw or municipal plan. It was identified later on as part of a pre-zone area, so they identified it as being a potential commercial lot. And so with the approval of the owner, it was changed over to a commercial lot once the lot stopped being used as a residential lot. In 2002, a residential use with a home occupation was permitted, Victor's Grooming and Pet Supplies. It was permitted at that location as a non-conforming use. 2 Clairwood is under a development agreement with the town, and therefore, if approved, an amendment to the development agreement will be required. There is adequate parking. It's not expected to have any high water demands. And something that I've neglected to mention was that there is a 3-meter wide buffer along the southernmost lot line, so the side lot line that abuts against a residential use. There's a 3-meter wide buffer zone there that will be maintained if this is approved. Staff find the proposed use to be reasonable, desirable, and in keeping with the bylaw. We have no concerns, and no concerns were received from the public. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Could the applicant please state your name for the record, please?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Helen Rees, but I'm also known as Helen Kincaid too.
Okay. Helen, you would have received the same package we did in the mail. Is there anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to members of the public or PAC asking some questions?
No.
All right. Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Brenda?
Just a quick one. It says that you want to do short-term rentals,
Yeah.
but your parents will be there some of the time. Are they mostly in the summer and they travel in the winter?
Exactly, yeah.
So what was short-term mean to you? A few months at a time, or?
Yeah, so basically how this all began is, yes, I would like to provide my parents accommodation in there between the summer months. So usually kind of June to September, they'll be there. And then I may rent it out in the winter months, just either weekly or a couple of weeks at a time, no longer than a month is what I'm expecting.
Oh, okay, so that's what I thought you were going to say about your parents, yeah. Okay, that's okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of PAC to the applicant? None being, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? None being, would a member of PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions? Brent?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that the Planning Advisory Committee approve the addition of residential use in the lower level to allow commercial residential use at 2 Clearwood Drive, PID 000-54205, as a compatible use to this property within the central commercial zone, subject to the following terms and conditions. 1, the residential use must be secondary to the primary commercial use of the main building. 2, the residential use is restricted to 100% of the lower level. No accommodations for short-term rental will be permitted in the upper level of the building where 100% of the proprietary clinic is located. 3, the residential use must be connected to the municipal sewer system as part of the building permit process, and all costs associated with the connection are the responsibility of the property owner. Once connected to the municipal sewer system, the residential use will receive a second sewer account, billing as per town sewage bylaw 005. 4, the current 3-meter wide buffering of the commercial property along the southernmost side lot line must be maintained at all times to protect adjacent properties from the commercial uses. 5, renovations to the building must follow the National Building Code, current edition. 6, an amendment to the development agreement must be made to reflect the uses permitted in the main building and applicable terms and conditions imposed by the PAC. 7, a building permit must be issued prior to any work being commenced.
Thank you, Brent. Any, can I have a seconder on that, please? Brenda?
I'll second that.
Is there any debate on that motion? None being, can we please vote on that? Thank you. Motion carried unanimously. In 5 to 7 business days, you have a letter in the mail, so please work with the town to have all necessary paperwork and documentation in place, and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Just want to give a little quick note on, we got 2 items left, item 7E and 7F. These were directed to PAC from council. So at this time, there's no interaction with the members of the public on these items, as there is a public hearing stated for March the 18th? March the 15th. So if any members of the public want to discuss the next 2 items, that's the time that the public gets to express their concerns for or against those items. So tonight, PAC members are just providing documentation, whether it's support of or support against the rezoning application. So everyone else is more than welcome to stay to listen to this. But again, we won't be asking the public to come up to the podium and speak for or against this item, any of these items. So we'll jump right into item 7E. Council is seeking the PAC views on an application to amend the municipal plan bylaw 054 and zoning bylaw 038 for the rezoning of PIDs 173765 and 250217 from single or two-family dwelling R1 to highway commercial. Mr. Colburn, can you introduce that before we talk to the developer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you've indicated, this comes through from council to PAC as part of a rezoning application and a municipal plan amendment. So the proposal is to develop, as shown on the screen, is to go from a residential zone to a highway commercial zone to support a two-phase commercial development. Right now, it's mixed. What's proposed is a mix of sort of office, professional sort of retail, and business-oriented types of development. So I want to sort of set the framework. So in terms of what is in the municipal plan that allows this to come through council and to PAC, to set an understanding of the elements that we look at from a planning perspective and PAC must take into consideration when they're reviewing these applications. So these items are set in the municipal plan by council. So from section 4.12, highway commercial uses refer to those which cater to the motoring public, such as auto sales, services, motels, restaurants, fast foods, other drive-in uses. And then it says 4.21, it shall be a proposal of council that as uncontrolled highway commercial uses tend to create challenges with respect to land use and traffic conflicts, any applications for highway commercial development outside of designated areas are permitted only as an amendment to the zoning bylaw and subject to consideration of the following conditions. So there's 4 items that we look at. Item 1 is that the site has adequate access to the arterial and collector streets. 2, that the site can be adequately serviced by water and sewer services in accordance with the applicable regulations. 3, that the site is sufficient size to meet all the parking, loading, setback, lot coverage, landscaping, and other requirements set out in the zoning bylaw. And 4, that consideration is given to the protection of the adjacent residential developments by requiring an acceptable vegetated buffer strip and also specifying the size, type, location of any signing, lighting to be used, and any other criteria deemed appropriate by council. Okay? So it comes to PAC for their review in terms of is it appropriate land use. Again, we always go back to 3 elements in terms of any variances or anything from a planning advisory committee. Is it reasonable, desirable, is it keeping with the intent of the bylaw? 3 simple elements that you have to keep in mind as well. So when we look at these elements, in terms of what's considered when we review these applications, item 1, adequate access to arterial or collector streets. Route 119 is a collector highway. There's proposed direct access as it is a controlled highway. The only way you can get access is by creating a public street. The proposed plan that's before council and now under review by PAC proposes a public street to be created off of Route 119 to provide service into this particular area. The overall plan is under phase 2 to potentially see some connection to the Finney Lane area. The intent of that is to provide alternate access from this particular area to Route 119. Right now, there's only one access in the particular subdivision, and that is through Monarch Drive. There's no other access in this particular area. As you look at the overall potential for additional development in terms of residential development at this time, as they are designated residential, there's still significant tracts of land where there could be additional residential development provided. So when we always look at alternate accesses into any subdivision development, whether it's off of Collector Street or a local street, we want that sort of connection for efficiency of traffic movement, of servicing, and obviously for safety in terms of access. There was a traffic study that was done by a consulting engineer that has identified, given that this is a phased build-out, that under phase one, traffic control devices in terms of from phase one out to the arterial would be, adequate, basically stop sign, given the volume of traffic. Once you move into phase two and further developments, then you're actually getting into probably signalized intersection or some sort of control with respect to traffic movements. In terms of adequate servicing by water and sewer, the area can be serviced by sewer. There are a couple of options in terms of sewering service. At this stage, there's been no defined engineering design done to show how that will be finalized. However, there is the ability to connect it to sewer service. In terms of water, again, it's a phased approach. When you look at this stage, what's being proposed in terms of levels of development, the level of service that would probably be required can be serviced by a well. However, once you go beyond that, you're getting into extension of the water system into that particular area. That's been reviewed at a high level by the town. It is potential to run the line potentially down the arterial and then providing service into that way. So it's not at this stage proposed to be going through Monarch or any of that area. It's simply a direct line underneath the highway to get into this particular commercial area. Item 3, sufficient size to meet all parking, loading, setbacks, lot coverage, landscaping, and other requirements of the zoning bylaw. Again, at this stage, it's a plan that's proposing a change in land use. So the building setbacks have been placed in accordance with the minimum requirements of the zoning bylaw. For example, so you're 15 meters away from the street line or the common line with the Route 119. The minimum setbacks for buildings that are abutting the residential property is the buildings have to be located so they're 2.5 times the height of the building away, which based on the distances that's proposed, they meet that requirement. There is the yellow areas are parking areas. These are based on sort of proposed uses. However, the number of parking spaces can be fluctuated and changed once we get down into actual detail and you get into building permit applications at that level. So you're looking at the overall, is there sufficient area to provide the levels of parking? In terms of lot coverage, again, that criteria is met. Item 4 is consideration given to protection of adjacent residential development by requiring an acceptable vegetated buffer strip, and you get into other types of concerns with respect to lighting impacts that would have on the residential component. So from a planning perspective, when we have land that's designated residential or of a different designation and you're changing, one of the things that we do have to take into consideration is what is the impacts that is going to have on adjacent residential properties? What is the nature of those concerns? Can those concerns be mitigated through the introduction of different measures as part of the development? So we always have to take into consideration the quality of life and the characteristics of the surrounding properties, and if the concerns have been raised, are they being addressed? Can they be addressed? And what means are by there's being used to do that? So I'm not sure if any concerns were forwarded to PAC in their package through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Secretary.
Go ahead, Violet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was one concern sent in, but it was noted that the council is looking after those. So all that was noted in the staff report was the subject line for each item, such as the water, traffic, noise pollution, just the subject matters were noted. And that was a brief that was sent from council to myself, from the clerk to myself. Thanks.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you've indicated that, you know, the public hearing stage is with council on March 15th, but just, I want to bring forward sort of a context again of what I've received through the clerk to PAC, so they're aware and that they can take that into consideration in terms of their review of this process. So with this particular application, the last information that I received from the clerk was, again, the deadline for submission is March the 10th, so there's still time to receive further correspondence. To date, there's been 11 letters of objection that have been received. As I've gone through the concerns, so what we're seeing is concerns regarding safety. So that would be the level of traffic that would be going into this particular area. Again, as noted, direct access into this particular area would be from the proposed street off of Monarch. So direct access into this particular area is not directed through the subdivision. It's actually coming off the arterial into here. To what level this connection will pan out in phase 2, again, the intent is not for traffic to drive all the way through to get through here, or in terms of, you know, access into here. Shortcutting may go through here, but at least it provides a second access. Concerns around increased traffic. So once you get further development out into different phases, where you have an access at Monarch, a second access here. There's also sort of been discussions at a high level about, you know, is there a potential for access, an alternate access into KV? Again, those things have been looked at through a traffic study. The recommendations have been made in terms of when signalized intersections and to when control would have to be put in place. Again, we can review that as we would review that traffic study to ensure that it looks at any of the concerns that have been raised through this process before we get into, if the project were to be approved by council and we get into development agreement stages, then we would obviously review those studies to make sure concerns and things have been identified or considered. Noise pollution is another item, light pollution. I'll get to those in a moment. Water, I think I've discussed in terms of water. There's an onus to demonstrate that there's sufficient capacity to support the level of development. And again, once you get beyond the 2 buildings that are in phase 1, there's automatically a need for provision of water. There was a concern regarding, well, all of a sudden Monarch residents be forced to hook into the water system. The intent of this would be to provide access water service to this commercial development. Any future expansion through Monarch, that's not been discussed at this time through this proposal, and that would be in the future, however that pans out. Property values was a concern in terms of the impact it would have on the property values, given the residential and the commercial backing on or being adjacent to residential properties. Again, residential assessments and those types of things, that's at a provincial level, so it would be outside of the jurisdiction of the municipality. When I look at this plan and look at the concerns, and when we get into light pollution, noise pollution, and just sort of general feedback, and during the presentation, one of the comments that are come back is this lower portion where the property abuts sort of the initial access into Monarch Drive. What's being proposed is a 7.5 meter buffer. Once you and it's proposed to put a trail in there. So the concern is once a trail goes in there and you've got 7.5 meter buffer, there isn't really much of a buffer left. So from a planning perspective, when I look at it, when we look at, you also have a hydro line that's running through there. So once you start developing that property and you have a hydro line which is already cut, and some of those properties have a clear, that transmission line and the opening for it actually goes through people's property. Once you get all that clear, then there's very limited buffering, right, between the development and those properties. So from a planning perspective, and to take into consideration one of the concerns, when we look at item 4 says that you have to have an accepted vegetated buffer. If we relate that back to the zoning bylaw, what the zoning bylaw says is that the width and what is an acceptable buffer is determined by the Planning Advisory Committee. So as a development officer, I don't have, in terms of the zoning bylaw requirements, I can't make the decision. I can't say, okay, but that's Planning Advisory Committee. So those are the types of things that as you review, that you need to take consideration. What is an adequate buffer? Here's the concern. How do we provide an adequate buffer to address the concern? So from a planning perspective, some of the options would be that buffer increases. Would it be reasonable that the development doesn't encroach into the actual transmission line easement, that there's a row of trees left there, which would be similar to what's being proposed further down? So you actually have at least a existing line of trees that protects that opening by the transmission line. Is that a reasonable buffer? So both council and planning would need to know what is an adequate buffer in this particular case, okay, to address concerns that have been expressed in terms of noise pollution, light pollution, and mitigating those impacts. I will leave it there. Again, open to any questions as we move through the process, and the applicant may have additional information to add.
Thank you, Dwight. Could the applicant please state their name for the record, please?
Mark Hatfield.
Mr. Hatfield, you would have, received the same package we did, and from that's directed back from council. Did you have a chance to read the recommendations that Dwight was talking about, and what's your, what's your opinion, and where you at with that before we maybe ask you some questions?
Yeah, and looking at the 12 recommendations, the first one being the difference in the buffering zone from 7.5 to 15. I think that's workable. Want to work with the neighborhood, want to work with the town on that. So definitely something we can definitely consider and look at. And I can't see that being a thorn in the road at all. The only one I can question was number 12, really, on the development. And if it doesn't proceed in 6 months with substantial proceeds, that it has to go back to restore lands. I guess that's new to me, being on that side of this before over the years. I've never seen that one, so I just kind of wanted to get some clarity on that, because obviously with delays and so forth and the pandemic we've had over the last 2 years, things can take a little bit longer. So I just wanted to get some clarification on that one. The other 11, I'm okay with.
Thanks, Mark. Maybe Dwight, can you give a little clearance? You want to give a little update on that item 12?
Just a couple of comments through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. One, anything that's in the staff report in terms of recommendations, those are things in terms of how planning would look at it. PAC has the authority whether they want to use those recommendations in the consideration of the process. Ultimately, it's the decision of, it's the recommendations and support or objection by the PAC that gets forward to the council, and then council uses that as in their consideration moving forward. So these recommendations are simply, things to consider as you review this. The item regarding the 6 months, that's a standard clause that's in a development agreement. And what that relates to is that if a developer commences a project and for some reason it goes on hold and you have disturbed soils, you have bare ground, and all of a sudden you've got runoff and you've got issues, it's addressing those concerns. So reinstating it, bringing it back, I believe the wording is bringing it back to a reasonable state, which means it's not replanting all the trees. It could be hydroseeding or something to actually stabilize soils and those types of things. If you've, all of a sudden created a significant negative impact on adjacent properties and it's gonna be on hold for a while, what do you do to address that issue? Okay, so it's making sure that the project moves along and concerns are addressed. It's a standard typical requirement that's in all our development agreements as it relates to these types of projects.
Thanks, Dwight. Mr. Hatfield, that kind of cleared that up a bit?
It did, just I guess one quick point through you, Chair, and that is, so does that mean like from the start date of something, you have to be completed in 6 months, or that it just can't sit idle for 6 months?
I believe it's can't sit idle, Dwight. There's got to be some ongoing work.
Okay. Perfect.
Thanks. Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Kendall?
I'm not sure if my question is to staff or to the applicant, but in number 1, the creation of a 15-meter buffer, is it reasonable to ask for 10 meters of trees in that 15 meters of buffer? Because I'm not sure I still think that if you're in a certain lot, yeah, like that lot may still be able to see the second house in, may still be able to see the entire new development, even if there's 15 meters. I could be wrong there, but.
So through you, Mr. Chair, as I iterated in my introduction, looking at item 4 of the considerations in the municipal plan, it's protecting adjacent residential development by requiring an acceptable vegetated buffer. That 15 number that's in there, that's a base of reference when we look at Millennium Drive. Millennium Drive has a 15-meter buffer between the residential properties and the commercial properties. But you always step back and say, okay, does that work in this particular case? So if you have openings, or you have openings along that 15 meters where, yep, even if it's 15 meters, I still have, openings in the buffer, and it's not adequate in providing that protection of adjacent residential developments, and PAC has to look at, okay, what is that reasonable? What do we look at in this particular circumstance as a reasonable buffer? Right, so you have to look at the area as well. Right, so that's in the zoning bylaw. There is no, in these particular cases, there's no magic number, right? What it goes back to is that it has to be adequate in terms of what the Planning Advisory Committee recommends as being adequate to address the concerns.
Thanks, Dwight. So oops, sorry, Dwight, hang on.
Threw out a number in terms of 15 because PAC members are familiar with the 15-meter buffer on Millennium Drive and how it works. But then I also said maybe perhaps it's looking at, what impact, once you clear all that and you start developing it, what impact will that existing opening for the power transmission line have in terms of the buffer, right? Does it all of a sudden leave a property completely exposed? Right? Even if you were to go back 15 meters, you're 15 meters into clearing, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, hang on, Kendall. Wait. Go ahead.
There might be just a way for the developer to maximize the area development, but maintain at least 10 meters of trees. 15 meters seems fair to me, but if we could somehow get, in my mind, 10 meters of trees, however they, I guess, orientate the development, at least that provides a citizen with some buffer.
Thanks, Kendall. Yeah, go ahead.
And looking at Mr. Mason, I understand exactly what you're saying. In the second house there with the clear cut of the hydro lines, there's not much we can do, whether we're 40 meters back or 50 meters back, there's a clear opening. So what could be done as potential if we look at doing a 10 or a 15 meter, we keep all the trees closest to the property and look at putting the trail into the 10 or the 15 meters and not on the residential side, but on the commercial side. So that would give the buffer there. There's nothing we're allowed to do underneath those area through MB Power to plant any trees. They're going to keep them clear. So unfortunately, we could look at, working with those residents, the one or two of them right there, if they wanted to do something on their property. As a developer, we could look at working with them. I know them both. So it's something we could look at potentially doing there. But it would have to be on their property and not on ours, since they're adjacent to the easement of the MB Power.
Thanks. Kendall?
Sorry, is it construction of like sound berms or other types of berms? Is that permitted in this type of, and maybe that would have to be done on their property as well?
Yeah, I think they're quite, those two lots, or one lot for sure is quite limited with that, the right-of-ways. Generally, the utility allow you to plant some trees that don't grow a certain height, that you can keep them at a certain height, but that would still more than likely not provide enough clearance there, to get in there, so. I mean, they're right at that edge of that right-of-way in that property. But Mark, what do you, you're still, you know them, so you're prepared to work with those
100%.
neighbors and come up with a solution that works and that everyone, hopefully at the end of the day, everyone's mutually agreed upon to move forward with that.
Exactly. Yep.
That sound reasonable, Kendall? Dwight?
Yeah, it's just from a planning perspective, it's when you look at, what can you utilize underneath the power transmission lines for in terms of the overall development. So like, as I go back before, if there's trees some of the trees are left along that side edge, is that reasonable? Again, I will leave that. I'm just putting out suggestions that PEC can consider. Ultimately, that's an item that's going to have to be addressed. Adequate buffering.
Thanks, Dwight. Any other members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Mr. Preston?
Mr. Chairman, my only question is for Dwight and for Mr. Hatfield. As the development rolls out and you get into your next phase, et cetera, Mark, and you get more density in there and more traffic, is there any consideration of possibly tying, I'm going to say run a row parallel to the arterial to tie your exit and the Monarch in? I guess what I'm thinking is when we look at Rossay Avenue and we look at Retail Drive in Ashburn Lake, right there by Deluxe Fish and Chips, that's a major, that intersection causes a lot of chaos on Rossay Avenue, and I know there's more spacing, but is that, and maybe it's something that's go back to DTI or whatever, but is it something potentially that, we see Monarch get closed on their arterial and everything feed across to your intersection, which will be a controlled intersection, as not right away, but as your development rolls out and becomes successful.
Just quickly for you, Mr. Chairman, we haven't had any discussions along that. As Dwight already mentioned, Mr. Colburn, regarding the potential continuation of Monroe Drive down into the future intersection along the high school property line to give them a second exit, and whether phase 2 would have to have either a set of lights or a potential roundabout, fairly similar to the one down at Kingsway, which works excellent. Would there be future use to connect Monarch there? I can't speak on that on behalf of the town, but as that street would connect onto Finney Lane, the residents of Monarch could have a controlled access to get out now by going down Monarch onto Colton Brook and onto Finney Lane and coming up the new street and then exiting out through the controlled area. Town may consider wanting to do something different, but that's what we've discussed so far.
Dwight?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So as I mentioned earlier, any access to the controlled highway, Route 119, is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation. They won't mind any other access other than the public street. In this particular case, the location has been determined by sight lines and other factors. So it's limited to where that particular can go. Any changes in terms of additional streets flowing into that would have to go back through both Department of Transportation and the consulting engineer who did the traffic study. And I guess final comment would be, there's been, comments and discussions regarding a second access to KBHS. I just want to be clear that that has not been pitched to the province. That's not coming from the province. That's come from a transportation master plan work that was done, the background document. So in 2021, and it was presented to council in December of 2021, the background study for the transportation master plan, when there was stakeholder engagement conducted, one of the concerns that was raised by one of the stakeholders was the only single access into the high school. So when this project came along, in terms of its being proposed, you look at it, you say, oh, there's potential that, you could have a second access, given that in the future, it would be controlled. Again, it's very important to iterate. That has not been printed to the province. There's been no agreements in place. It's conceptual at this point in time. And if that was to happen, we would actually have to go back and look at the traffic study, because I'm not sure at this stage if that's been considered in the traffic study. All right, so, but at this point in time, we're looking at the access purely with respect to the proposed development from there out to the highway.
Thanks, Dwight. Brenda?
Oh, just a quick question. I know you're looking for highway commercial. We have commercial areas, and what's the difference between highway commercial? What can it give you that another just regular commercial cannot do?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we're looking for in this property is the commercial that's left in the town of Quispamsis is very small parcels. There's no real large parcels left that are accessible through sewer and water. So this property here has the accessibility to have larger box stores or larger commercial developments that have a water supply and have sewer access.
So if it was just commercial, you could not have those big box stores if you have?
Oh, I could direct that one to Dwight on exactly on the definition of the highway commercial. We felt when we were proposing this, that highway commercial would be the best suited branding for the area.
Okay, I don't have problem, I like the idea, I have another exit into that area. So, because there's a lot of development going on in there. I think you have to watch like the water, and I know you're putting your buildings in there, your offices and things, and assume the background of that will not be paved. It would be something that like gravel or something where you store your equipment, just for the water.
Yes, in certain areas there would be, on the backside of the properties, there would be something different than asphalt throughout the mall. There would be areas that would be paved, yes, as per the developers agreement, but other areas would be just gravel.
And then that would have to be taken care of with your water, looking at the drainage and things like that.
Yeah.
So.
Correct. We have a stormwater management plan.
Yeah.
And which just has a low level one now, which would have to be elevated to a high level stormwater plan that would have to be net zero.
Yeah, because we look at that, but we have to think of the people on Colton Brook and Finney Remain and all of those places. Yeah. It's a nice area, so we don't want it destroyed.
100%.
Anyway, maybe.
Dwight, can you talk about that highway commercial?
So the difference is highway commercial is geared towards more of services to the motoring public. So things like you'd see on Millennium Drive, right? Plus some other stuff that you can do in terms of professional office space and those types of things, but that's sort of the difference. In terms of the comment regarding storage of equipment and those types of things, one of the other items that we would be looking at is any storage. You have to take into consideration you're adjacent to the Colton Brook, so how do you ensure there's no runoff and pollution? So you'd be looking at storm scepters and those types of things in part of that design as well, in terms of the drainage system. So all that would be required under the development agreement.
Any other questions from members of PAC to the applicant or to town?
Mr. Chair, it's Mark here.
Yeah.
question directed at Mr. Colburn. Just back on the buffer, I know there's some limitations there, with it being vegetated and the size of the vegetation specific to that easement. But like the accountability around that, I know Mr. Hatfield mentioned he's got an existing relationship with those homeowners and shouldn't be a problem to work out a deal. But what if that ownership of that property changes in the near future? Wondering, is that through the developer's agreement where the accountability comes in for the checks and balances on that requirement?
So there's two avenues that we can look at, and the first one that we would be looking at is any area that's a buffer is vested to the municipality as land for public purposes, which means ownership of it. It comes to the town and we have control over what happens in there. That would be the first avenue, and then you can layer on top of that provisions in the development agreement that would control activities within the area or adjacent to it. So there's a couple of approaches that we can take.
Thank you, Dwight. Mark, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there any further questions for the applicant or town? None being, would a member of PAC like to put a motion forward to proceed with supporting council in the rezoning or against the zoning with comments? Anyone from PAC want to put a motion for or against supporting the council in the rezoning to amend the municipal plan? Brent?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion. PAC proceed with supporting council in the rezoning application to amend the municipal bylaw 054 and zoning bylaw 038 for rezoning of PIDs 173765 and 250217 from single or two-family dwelling R1 to highway commercial with the following terms and conditions. The creation of a 15-meter buffering zone as relates to the neighborhood residential R1 zones must be shown on the final plans. The developer must undertake the extension of the municipal water system there prior to phase 2 development. 3, an engineered design stormwater management plan and drainage system stamped by a registered professional engineer licensed to practice in the province of New Brunswick is to be completed and submitted for each phase of the development. Street lighting installation at each entrance to the development should be installed. Non-signalized control methods as per the traffic analysis report must be installed as the Route 119 access point for the phase 1 level of the development. 6, a signalized intersection at the Route 119 access location must be installed once development of the full build-out in connection to Finney Lane is underway. The cost of the construction of the signalized intersection will be on the developer unless the developer enters into a cost-sharing arrangement made with the town and or the province. Details regarding a cost-sharing arrangement shall be noted in the development agreement. 7, all building light fixtures and parking lot lights to be downward directed. 8, all materials and equipment ordered on site are the responsible of the developer. 9, the developer is to enter into a developer's agreement with the town of Quispamsis. 10, the developer shall undertake the complete work for each approved phase within a reasonable time period, recognizing that the development agreement carries a 2-year time limit. 11, the land should be developed in accordance with the building and development plans filed with and approved by the town for each phase. 12, if the development does not substantially proceed within 6 months of the date of approval for each phase, the developer shall restore the lands to an attractive natural state, and such restoration is to be completed within 60 days.
Thank you, Mr. Preston. Can I have a seconder on that? Oh, Dwight, go ahead, Dwight.
I'll move with the second, Mr. Chair.
Pardon?
Move to get a seconder before.
Okay, perfect. Can I have a seconder on that, please? Brenda?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Mr. Colburn?
So, Mr. Chair, just as sort of clarification, the recommendation was sort of standardize it at 15 meters. So I would understand that to mean that the 7.5 meter that's shown on the plan is not acceptable. So I'm just in terms of the discussions that's been put forward, just so that council was clear on the recommendations that's coming from PAC. Just sort of a clarification whether that should be a fixed number or if that an alternate buffering to mitigate concerns is to be finalized. Just sort of a way of clarification.
Brent?
I would say the 15 meters, but as you mentioned, with alternative,
Considerations.
yeah, there. So there's a little bit of flexibility between the town and the developer.
Thank you. Is there any further debate in that motion? None. Can we have a vote, please? To support it. Motion carried unanimously. So Mark, best of luck with you working with council, getting that approved, and looks like a nice project for the town, as long as we get everything all in place. Good luck. Thank you. All right, item 7F. Another item, the council seeking PAC views on an application to amend zoning bylaw 038, a rezoning of PID 00251694 and 302-16527 from single or two-family dwelling R1 to terrace dwelling residential R3 with distinct ownership. Dwight, can the applicant please come up to the podium? And Dwight, maybe you can introduce that in the meantime?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, as you've stated, this is a from council to the Planning Advisory Committee seeking their written views on a request to amend the zoning bylaw to support a proposed higher density development. In this case, a terrace style development with distinct ownership. In accordance with the Community Planning Act, any rezoning requires the written views of the Planning Advisory Committee as part of the process in consideration of rezoning. As I did with the previous agenda item, I will go back and always refer to the municipal plan because it's the municipal plan that establishes the criteria by which both the Planning Department and Planning Advisory Committee and Council take into consideration when they're considering rezonings, in this particular case from a R1 zone to a R3 zone, again to support residential development. So any change in this particular case, because we're going from residential to residential, except it's a higher density or different style of residential development, it's an amendment to the zoning bylaw. It doesn't require a municipal plan amendment because in the future land use map it is identified as residential. So in accordance with the municipal plan, it states that when going from single or two family units to a higher density, there's 5 criteria that we look at. The development be located on or adjacent to a designated arterial or collector street. In this case, it is the Pettingill Road, which is identified as a collector street, so it meets that criteria. And the reasoning for that is so that higher traffic generated will not pass through lower density residential streets. So in this particular case, you're coming directly off of Pettingill Road into the proposed development, which satisfies that particular item. I will add that there is a traffic study that is proposed to consider the impacts of the development at this particular location with Kensington. The scope of the project will also take into consideration the fact that you have a school, so Lakefield. So it will look at the traffic patterns during school session and then take consideration the level of build out, as well as it will look at any traffic that might come through that particular subdivision from adjoining subdivisions. The proposed design of the subdivision in terms of traffic and in terms of connection will look at introducing traffic calming measures to obviously deter traffic from using it as a cut through, or sort of just increase your travel time. So in essence, you're better off staying on the collector street to get to further adjoining residential developments. The traffic study will also look at potentially if there is a need for a left turn lane off the Pettingill Road. There are occasions when we do get some queuing of traffic waiting to turn up Kensington to get to the school. So all that will be in the scope of the traffic study, which will be undertaken subject to decisions of council with respect to the proposed rezoning. Item 2 that we look at is lot sizes, yard requirements, building heights, number of units, parking requirements be subject to the conditions as outlined in the zoning bylaw. At this stage, what we've seen presented does align with the intent of the zoning bylaw. The plan that's been submitted indicates the setback lines. So your minimum setback in the rear yards is 9 meters, and then there's 6 meters from sidelines. The plan has that line outlined, basically offset from the perimeter of the two properties, and then the buildings are within that. Building heights, we anticipate that's not going to be an issue. They're going to be, the design of the buildings are going to be such that you're not looking at multiple story buildings, or so that's not really a concern. Parking requirements would obviously be in line with the bylaw requirements. And again, as we move through this project, because it's phased, as we get into the actual submission of building permit applications, then actually, if there's a need for variances, then they would have to return to the planning advisory committee or go through the development officer, depending on the nature of the variance. But at this particular time, we don't anticipate any significant variances that would be considered of significant impacts outside of the reasonable, desirable intent elements. So item 3 of the list is development will not exceed existing capacities of the municipal services. So the municipal services in this case would be sewer. We don't anticipate exceeding the sewer line, as it will be adjacent to the trunk line that runs underneath the QR trail, which was a capital upgrade project a few years back. In terms of other municipal services, stormwater, it would be subject to a comprehensive stormwater management plan that would actually look at, again, as we talked about, a net zero, which means you'd have to look at a comprehensive to make sure that water comes off the site, does not significantly impact or exceed the capacities of existing infrastructure. In this particular case, you're looking at ultimately the water making its way to Ritchie Lake, which flows through existing culverts underneath C and rail line. So they would be taken sort of as the constraints, and then any capacities that go above and beyond, or any runoff that goes above the capacities of that infrastructure, would have to be attenuated on site. There is lands available on site because they're, as part of this development, because it's distinct ownership, you're creating individual lots, which means you have to provide LPP. So there's land for public purposes being provided as part of this process. So all stormwater management has to ensure that you don't exceed the capacities of the existing infrastructure, or you would have to undertake upgrading that infrastructure, which in this particular case, you're getting into CN and their requirements with respect to that. So that would be taken consideration. 4 is that if the proposed site is not serviced by municipal water system, the proponent must undertake a hydrogeological study to demonstrate local well yields is sufficient of quality and quantity to support the density of development proposed, and existing wells will not be adversely affected by the proposed development. So this particular item does fall under that because it's not serviced by municipal water. A hydrogeological study or a comprehensive water source and supply assessment would have to be undertaken to ensure there's sufficient water, or at least demonstrate there's sufficient water of quality and quantity to support the development. That would have to be a requirement to be met. And the 5th item is that there are adequate landscape buffer areas on the lot periphery to screen buildings and parking areas from adjacent low-density residential developments. So in this particular case, there's a 9-meter setback from the rear of the properties, abutting the lots on the existing lots on the Pettingill Road. Within that 9-meter setback, in terms of the building setbacks, there has to be a minimum of a 3-meter buffer. Again, I go back to, in this particular case, it does say 3 meters. However, it is to the satisfaction of the Planning Advisory Committee. So we always go back to those items of if there's gaps or openings in that particular area, then how do you mitigate that? Does that require planting of trees or fencing or those types of things? So that's an item that would have to be considered in this particular development. As you can see, there is a reasonable amount of existing vegetation, and it's my understanding that it is the intent to maintain as much of the existing vegetation as reasonably possible, not only for buffering, but it also aids in stormwater management and those types of things as well. So again, those are the criteria that are established by council in the municipal plan. That's what council looks at, that's what planning looks at, and that's what the Planning Advisory Committee takes into consideration as they look at this request and provide the written comments back to council. The also thing to note is the plan, the street design in this particular case will look at a reduced street width, which means you're again reducing the amount of hard surface as much as possible. It is also a traffic calming measure, and it also introduces a walking pedestrian path on the opposite, sort of on outside of that travel path of the vehicles, and also provides connection to the QR trail. So, I will leave it at that. If council or if PAC has any questions, again, can address.
Thanks, Dwight. Could the applicant please state their name for the record? Mr. McIntyre, you would have received the same package we did. Anything you'd like to add or discuss based on what you received from Dwight, and before members of PAC ask you a few questions?
The package laid it out really good. I think it pretty much explained what we're looking to do, so any questions, send them on.
Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Brenda?
Just a quick question and some comments. Street B, it doesn't look like it's going to go back in out onto the Pettingill. It's going to be a cul-de-sac?
Yeah,
Okay.
so that one there would end, and the reason behind that is there's another property on the back side, and it's got an entrance on both sides of that existing driveway.
Yeah.
So if we were to use ours, they wouldn't be able to use theirs because of the offset.
Okay, and Kensington will be a Straw
across,
Street.
yeah.
I will tell you, I live down handy in that cul-de-sac that's well beyond the length it should be in these days, Maple Grove. But my only concern is the amount of water, but it's also, as a member of PAC, we have to rely on people doing the homework about water supplies.
Yep.
So I'm good with that, if that, you pass that. I'm also good with the concept that you're going to have a couple of connections down to the walking trail. That's very well used. Now, because the one on Heritage, the builders on that street have just blocked it, filled it with rocks, dead trees, and not doing anything with it, and we do have to get at them for do that. Also, along there, you see silt and stuff. It's just coming down the hills, and it eventually, unless you're careful, it can make it into Ritchie Lake, and that's not good.
Nope.
We see the silt. And the other side of the track, or the trail, I called a couple of times because the development in there behind Lakeville Elementary School, muddy waters coming down, and I complained about that. I am a complainer. But a bonus thing about having houses along the trail, backing on the trail, I find if there's houses, people are more likely to clean up after the dogs because people can see them.
Yeah.
And because there's issues in places where basically the other side, it's disgusting sometimes.
Yeah.
You have to watch where you're walking, and that is very gross. So my only concern is the water, if you have enough, and how you do your traffic, and also the silt, and taking care of your ditches around the trail, because I find that a lot of the building supplies that blow around, they're just there, or the rocks are coming down, and people have moved them off the track so they can walk. It's not very well maintained. So I think the houses along there would help that, because people will see what's going on those trails. And it's beautiful. I walk them all the time, so I will watch this happening.
Thanks,
Anyway,
Brenda.
that's it.
Dwight, you want to add something there, Dwight?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of things. One, it's an oversight on my part in terms of just highlighting some of the correspondence that we received. So I'll get to that in a moment, just before PAC asks questions. But a comment regarding the access, the cul-de-sac, Street B, just in addition to what the applicant has indicated, another concern that we have there is the actual line of sight. As a driveway, probably sufficient. As a street, there's some challenges. So once you get additional streets coming off of the adjacent properties on the other side of Pettingill Road, that coming together, it would be a concern. So that's why we've sort of recommended that it terminate.
Talking about my street. It's a cul-de-sac well longer than
Thanks, Dwight. Oh, sorry.
Just
you
one
wanna
other
go ahead,
thing.
Dwight?
So we've received thus far 3 letters, 2 opposing, 1 in support. The concerns, I think I have sort of highlighted them in my sort of intro of this project. It's regarding concerns about water, which Ms. Valley has brought forward, and just some of the well depths in the area. Some of them are excess of 500 feet, so there's some concern with water, but obviously a comprehensive water study is required. Impacts in terms of how stormwater management will be handled, and any impacts that it would have on sort of soil retention and stability. From a planning perspective and engineering perspective, we've discussed that with the applicant, as indicated by the sort of the rock finger drains, we call them, along the side for stability. So that's something that would be taken consideration. Minimizing the amount of trees and green space to be lost. That's a sort of a factor in this particular development. That would be sort of, again, we always go back to our zoning bylaw. You're limited to what you can cut, basically to reasonableness in terms of the construction of buildings and roadways. And again, traffic, and that will be identified by the traffic study. And the final one would be with respect to buffering. So again, it's providing reasonable buffers that mitigate concerns of adjacent property owners, lower density, and that any gaps or openings are adequately addressed to address that concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. Is there any further questions to the applicant from members of PAC or to the town? None being, would a member of PAC like to put a motion forward for supporting council in the rezoning or against with some conditions?
Put forward a motion, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, yep.
Put forward the motion that PAC support council in the rezoning of PIDs 00251694 and 30216527 from single or two-family dwelling R1 to terrace dwelling residential R3 with distinct ownership. The following terms and conditions must be considered. Number one, a full comprehensive traffic flow analysis will be required to be submitted. Number two, a detailed comprehensive water supply and source assessment report by a certified professional engineer is to be completed and submitted. Number three, an engineered design stormwater management plan and drainage system stamped by a registered professional engineer licensed to practice in the province of New Brunswick is to be completed and submitted for each phase of the development. Number four, a site design showing the creation of the buffering zone as it relates to the neighboring residential R1 zones must be approved by the town prior to construction. Number five, street lighting installation at the entrance to the development shall be installed. Number six, all building lights to be downward directed. Number seven, all materials and equipment ordered on site are the responsibility of the developer. Number eight, the developer is to enter into a developer's agreement with the town of Quispamsis. Number nine, the developer shall undertake to complete the work for each approved phase within a period of 2 years following approval. Number 10, the land shall be developed in accordance with the most recently dated building and development plans filed with and approved by the town for each phase. And number 11, if the development does not substantially proceed within 6 months of the date of approval for each phase, the developer shall restore the lands to an attractive natural state, and such restoration is to be completed within 1 month.
Thank you, Mark. Can I have a seconder on that? Brenda?
I'll second that.
Any debate on that motion? None being, can we have a vote, please? That being, motion's carried by unanimously. So the recommendation's going to council. So best of luck in your development and make sure you work out all your issues, and hopefully at the public hearing, you'll get council's approval and hear some views from the residents. So best of luck. You're good to go and on your way. We'll move on to item 8, information items and discussion items. Can I have a motion to receive and file, please?
So move, Mark.
Seconder, Brenda?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion carried, and we're gonna have to do a vote on that. Item 9, can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So move, Mark.
Have a seconder on that? Brenda?
I'll second that for you.
Thank you. Motion carried. Meeting for Tuesday, March 8th, Planning Advisory Committee, Town of Quispamsis has been adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.